Welcome to the Teachers on Fire podcast, where I profile agents of growth and transformation in education today. Each guest shares their highs, their lows, their passions, their goals, and the resources that are shaping their thinking and inspiring their practice. For show notes and links from each episode, visit teachersonfire.net. You can also follow the show at Teachers on Fire on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And of course, please subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm your host, Tim Cavey. Let's meet today's guest. Today, I'm excited to be speaking with Dr. Brad Gustafson. Brad is a National Distinguished Principal, best-selling author, and speaker. He's also a Digital Innovation in Learning Award winner and a member of the National School Boards Association 20 to Watch. Brad recently released a new book that is making a child-centered ruckus in education. I'm pretty excited to hear more about reclaiming our calling, but before we get there, I do want to mention that you can connect with Brad anytime via bradgustafson.com. Brad, are you ready to talk education today?
Tim, as they say in the movies, longtime listener, big fan. I'm super excited to connect today, so thanks for the opportunity.
Well, that's awesome. And Brad, you have been super supportive of the podcast, so I deeply, deeply appreciate that, and I am totally thrilled, man. So let's jump into this. Why don't you start by giving us a few more details about your current context in education? Where do you serve, and what does that look like on a daily basis?
Sure. So I'm in Minnesota, so everyone should be feeling cold right now because if you've seen the forecast in the last month, you know that our highs are below zero, which is just a crazy thing to wrap your head around. But I work at an elementary school, K-5, and we have, approximately 813 kids in our school. And I think like most educators would describe their school, it's just a really incredible spot for kids to learn. So I think that's one reason why I love having these conversations, because we can kind of shine a little bit of light on the people and the kids who are doing the work every day that other people might not necessarily get a glimpse into if they're just reading the newspaper or whatnot.
That's true. So, Dr. Brad, we're going to start at a low moment. Tell us about that experience of adversity, one that you faced somewhere along your teaching or education career, and then describe how you overcame it.
I feel like I have many low moments. I mean, life is so good, but there are just reflective things probably that we all have where we just think to ourselves, boy, I could have done better on that one, or I'll do better next time on that. But one of those stories is there was a kiddo in our school, and oftentimes I would get called to help her, or more appropriately, help staff as she was being insubordinate or fleeing or just really having a tough time regulating her big emotions. And I was always, I was supportive of staff, but I didn't feel like I was super effective. And by that, I mean, when I intervened, it usually resulted in some type of discipline or suspension. There was no magic happening, right? This would not be in a Hollywood teaching or principling movie. And after one such suspension, I called her parent and just had an honest conversation, kind of sharing what the big emotions look like and why it was so bad, et cetera, et cetera. And towards the end of the conversation, the parent said, just honestly, like a parent could do, I just wish you would have gotten to know her. And I let that absorb a little bit. It didn't change the fact that I had suspended her daughter that was my solution, I guess. And I thought about that. And then even after we hung up, I just thought, she's so right. She's so right. And just to long story short, I made it a point from that moment on to get to know her daughter as a person in our school and not just someone who I interacted with when her teachers needed support because she was struggling. So we would proactively set aside time to do things surprisingly that we both enjoyed, right? So whether it was building things with technology or like Lego drones, I mean, the list goes on, just experimenting and trying really crazy stuff that we actually had to learn or search on YouTube to do. It was pretty innovative or uncharted. And we developed a relationship over the course of the year. And then lo and behold, Tim, end of the year, I get called again, similar story. She's fleeing school grounds out on the edge of property and just really having a tough time with something. So in my mind, as I'm running out to try to help, I'm thinking, will this pay off? I mean, what will happen here? And lo and behold, she kind of listened, and I was able to de-escalate. And she came inside of my office, and we worked on a project for 10 minutes, and she was able to get right back at it and go to class. And I'm not saying that would happen every time, but it was just such a strong, testimony to myself, like a little investment on the front end on getting to know kids' hearts and passions and just know them as people pays off. And I've seen similar stories play out for myself, like right and wrong. When I don't do that, things don't go as well for kids, which is what we're here for. And when I do actually be intentional, it makes all the difference in the world.
Wow. Well, just following your content and seeing what you're putting out there, Brad, I can tell you are very visible and relational in your building. So thanks for being transparent and sharing that story. And you're right, when those affirmations come along, boy, is that confirming and motivating.
Right. And Tim, but I just want to be super clear. I mean, don't miss the main part of the story. I crashed and burned and had handled it super poorly leading up to that epiphany and that parent kind of giving that pointed advice. So I guess I wanted to that's the main point, and it was a learning moment for me. So
That's the low point. Yeah.
yeah,
I hear
you're
you.
being you're being very gracious in your analysis of that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I do. I sincerely mean that. Thank you for sharing. I think it's so encouraging to hear. I love John Harper's My Bad podcast because I think it's really, really instructional and it's encouraging, right? To know that we're not the only ones screwing up. And sometimes, and not to say that, well, I'm sort of putting words in your mouth, but I know for myself, I think many of the educators who are conscientious and want to do a good job, we're extremely mindful of all the areas where we are not measuring up. And so it is encouraging to hear from other people that, hey, we're all learning and growing together.
Right, and I couldn't agree more. John's podcast for me, I've just noticed educators we're hardest on ourselves because we care so much. So John's podcast helps us see that we're not alone, and other people mess up, and in some strange way, we can actually learn through their sharing without us having to make that mistake because we're making plenty of our own, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about reclaiming our calling. Hold on to the heart, mind, and hope of education. That came out just recently, and it's been all over Twitter. I've seen it play out over Twitter chats and in exchanges. Very exciting stuff. Share with us about the heart and main message of the book. Brad, why did you write it, and what can educators expect to gain from it?
Just speaking of vulnerability, this is just my heart, and just in conversations with educators across the country, like for a lot of us, there's this real tension and almost conflict. I don't think that's too strong of a word between the pressure, quite honestly, to raise student achievement and just have that be the metric. It seems like one of the main metrics by which we're judged, and I'm using that word intentionally. And then this other part of learning and education and the human existence where we're growing people and their character and helping them innovate and take risks and develop all these other skills that will help them with learning that honestly lasts for a lifetime above and beyond a test. So you have these two parallel tracks, and achievement is an important thing. We want our kids to learn at a high level, but just not, and this is the heart of the book, we don't want them to learn at a high level for a test at the expense of all the other things that they were created to do and that they have this potential to do in life. And that's a conflict when we've been kind of put in a system, whether it's self-imposed pressure or just conversations that are happening or test scores being reported like box scores in the newspaper. The book is about how do we restore balance and affirm, or should I say, hold on to the things that matter most and refusing to let go of those things. So this book really is an affirmation to the people doing the work, and it's kind of permission to say, yes, helping kids achieve matters, but it's not it's never an either or thing, because that's actually another thing I've run into is when you start talking about teaching the whole child or teaching the whole learner, some people's mind goes right to that we're dismissing our obligation to help kids learn at a high level, and it's not. It's like, how do we do both and stay sane and stay fulfilled and respond to however we've individually been called?
I think that message is so critical, and it's one that we're starting to hear a little bit more of, but you're absolutely right. There's that distinct possibility. It's more than a possibility. It's definitely happening in so many schools where achievement is everything, and we're losing a little bit. We're losing sight of, as you call it, our calling. And so I think that message is needed. I also wanted to ask you, Dr. Brad, and just to be clear, you didn't ask for me to plug this, but I was looking at another title you put out called Renegade Leadership, Creating Innovative Schools for Digital Age Students. So I have a particular interest and passion for digital literacy and a lot of the issues in that space. If you could give educators one word of advice around EdTech and digital literacy, what would it be?
Well, the one word to quite literally answer your question kind of goes to connectedness. So I've been guilty of this too, but oftentimes I'll look for the next best thing or the app that I think will change my career as a principal or help be an epiphany to teachers and students. And it seems like those silver bullets are really fleeing, or they're a mirage of sorts. So really, just the concept of connectedness is the advice that I would have. So as we're seeking digital tools, the purpose I hope oftentimes should be like, how will this bring us together? How will it connect us and the learners we serve to content, to opportunities, to one another, as opposed to creating screen zombies who learn in isolation or consume content. So connectedness in lots of different ways, the human way, but also to opportunities and just unfathomable resources to help aid in creating the learning. We have, as a quick story, like an example. So in our school, one of the things we try things a lot, just understanding it may work, it may not, maybe it'll be a journey to figure out. But we saw several years ago virtual reality coming to the forefront of outside sectors. So we had Google expeditions come in. It was pretty cool. When I did the Great Wall of China experience, and this is a little bit shallow, but I'm thinking to myself, okay, cross that off the bucket list, because the virtual reality, it was so real, Tim. It was like I was at the Great Wall of China. But then I was just reflecting on that, thinking if the pinnacle of learning is putting a cardboard or goggles on a student's eyes and just saying, wow, we've arrived. I mean, getting back to reclaiming our calling, that's not it, and that's not the connectedness that Renegade Leadership stands for either. So we actually invested in it happened to be a 360 fly camera. It's just a 360-degree camera where kids can make their own virtual reality, which is a little bit different. Like learning how something works and then creating content, it's different than consuming. So the reason I share that story when we talk about connectedness, it's connecting to the creator and the maker that's in every student too, because that's going to be a skill, that's going to be a mindset that will transcend their time in schools, right? Because if we're just teaching for something where they're achieving on a test, that's pretty short lived, and that's maybe more for us than them, personally, I think. But if we're teaching more deeply to the core of the work and responding to our calling, they'll be able to take those skills with them wherever they go for the long haul, because they matter.
Wow, well said. I think the transferability, right, of the
Yeah.
skills that we're teaching is really key. How can they, yeah, you said it. How can they apply them in other contexts? So we're on this topic of content creation, which walks right into my next question. I love what you're putting out there on your YouTube channel. And if you haven't seen Brad's channel, he shares short clips of learning, from book talks to student created math tutorials. What can you say about the importance of using technology to make learning visible today?
I've heard people talk about this, whoever's doing the talking is doing a lot of the learning, right? If you're actively engaged in the reflecting, the conversation, something's happening on a different level than if you're reading and not responding to it or talking about it. So, in addition to YouTube, we've been doing a little bit more with Facebook Live and sharing book talks and some other things like that. And like the why behind that, not the what, but the why is, if we're leading the YouTube generation, if we're teaching in the YouTube generation, does it not make sense to have kids be active creators and consumers in that world alongside us, right? Not just independently throwing kindergartners to the YouTube wolves, but really starting early on and scaffolding and modeling what it looks like and what to do if you see something that's not right, right? Having those conversations. Because a lot of what we do in our school, and I've talked to teachers about this, but for me personally, I'll speak for myself. If I would want it for my own three kids at home, then that's the standard for at our school, and that's a really, really high standard. And I know for my own three kids, I don't want them learning how to interact in a digital environment at their friend's house after school when I don't know who's home,
Right.
right? I want them learning from the best of the best, and that's the teachers in our school and schools across the country. Teachers who are modeling, connecting the YouTube generation, and helping kids create. That's a really big deal. And create, Tim, not as a novelty where kids are super excited because they did a mystery Skype once out of the school year, or once a month, but really as a base expectation that I go to my school and I can expect that on a daily basis I'm connecting. There's that word again. I am connecting with my classmates, my teacher, and the world in a safe and scaffolded environment.
Oh, this is all music to my ears, and I think our audience as well. On that note, my own personal soapbox is, and one of many, I guess, if I'm honest. But I
Preach,
love
preach, Tim. Let's hear it.
Well, I love the collaborative power of the G Suite tools. And, we hear a lot, and rightly so, that, if we're just simply putting an assignment, if we're simply putting a handout on a Google Doc, well, we haven't really improved the learning. And I think the power of the G Suite is that collaboration piece, the real-time collaboration, whether it's slides or docs or drawings or these different platforms. And I just like to see that real-time collaboration spill over into other applications and tools as well, just because I think that is such a powerful advantage of the age that we live in today. And I'm sure this podcast will sound silly in 10 or 20 years, but I think where we're at right now is we're just starting to pull back the covers on what is possible in terms of students working together on products, whatever that learning product looks like, and doing so in collaboration and teamwork, right?
Right. The thing that won't sound silly ever, Tim, is having conversations about leading change,
Yeah.
about valuing the work educators are currently doing, and then about how we might help each other get to our own personal next best step or the next best iteration of our work, whether it's understanding or just tapping into things deeper. So one of the things, and this is, I actually shared this on my bad when I was with John, but part of my early problems, just my own ignorance, was not valuing the work currently being done and being hyper focused on innovation. Like, we need to get from here to here, but all the people in our school who had dedicated their lives to being right where they were and doing amazing work, like the standard work that schools need to stand on, I just wasn't seeing or honoring that. So the reason I bring that up is if people are using digital tools as kind of electronic worksheets, for example, I know it's very easy to demonize and it sounds cool and it can be cool graphics on Twitter to say not to do that. But I think at the heart of the matter is recognizing that everyone's on a journey. And if we want to demonize where one person is at and say we're at a better point, or say we should be here, we can't be here, we completely immediately diminish everything it took that person to get to where they actually are. It's a different feeling when we see that person, we try to learn from them and understand the value they're seeing, and maybe using a digital word processing tool, which is maybe different than the potential that tool might have. But then just having conversations and having a relationship to be able to say that is really something. And did you know that tool can also do that? And how are you using it? Because I want to learn. Just meeting them there. It's a different dynamic, and I think that, at least for me personally, I won't speak for anyone else, but when people see where I'm at and I feel safe in that, but yet safe to grow and almost expected to grow, it's completely different. And I won't shut down, as opposed to someone kind of pointing a finger, even internally, saying, "Can't believe he's still doing that," because that doesn't feel safe. So I don't know. I think approach matters.
Well, that is a powerful point. I think I've heard this term this year. Actually, I've just come across the term collective efficacy, and it comes from the Visible Learning Institute. But for me, it's just that idea that, like you said, we're all moving forward, and it's not so much about critiquing in a spirit of I'll say condemnation, as much as it is saying, hey, here's a way you can improve, here's a way to grow. And that is an entirely different tone. And you're right. I think most of my PLN conversations happen on Twitter, and most of it, 95% of it, is entirely positive and sort of celebratory in nature. But sometimes we can fall into that throwing stones at, or almost like self-congratulatory, I don't do this, and that starts to make educators anxious about sharing their learning and sharing what they're doing.
The one thing I'll say when you're talking about excitement, and we're talking about student ownership here and learner empowerment, but just a quick story, like, if sometimes I need a story to be able to understand even what people are talking about. So when we talk about the technology and the creation and the YouTube and everything that you're talking about, not as a novelty, but as a matter of practice, or just kids expecting it. What I've seen in our school is that when kids come in kindergarten and the conversation is about how might we amplify this student's voice, and that happens in first grade, second, third, the list goes on. By the time they get ready to leave us in fifth grade, I mean, these are empowered kids who are doing things that personally, years ago, I never would have imagined they could do. And we had a former student, middle schooler now, speak at our state principal conference, and he just crushed it. And that's a different mentality, right? School leaders learning from learners, right? And probably it was very powerful. And then also in Reclaiming Our Calling, there's this a student wrote the foreword to that, and he has a graphic novel cartoon he developed, and then he shares a story about educators, and this was all him starting back in kindergarten, people seeing his talents and investing in those, not just his deficits and kind of where we wanted him to improve in reading and math, but really seeing his strengths as well. And that's like for me, that's the story, that's the picture, that's the end goal. And it will look different for every student we serve, but that's what's possible when people rally together to look at student strengths and actually kind of give kids more ownership of this whole process.
Oh, exciting stuff. So, Dr. Brad, you're a PhD. You've reached the end of your learning, right?
Yeah. At least the end of my student loan oriented learning, I think.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
So I know you're a lifelong learner. You model that. How are you looking to grow professionally and improve your practice this year? Can you share about a specific goal or an area that you're working on?
Sure. One of my goals is to really focus on just having meaningful conversations and invest in people, whether it's them needing help or me needing help. So lots of offline conversations, whether that's on Voxer, Twitter, phone call, etc. So a lot of times it's just people reaching out and we're actually discussing things like that tension we started talking about earlier. And as people are leading change in their school, I'm really invested in trying to help the best I can, but also trying to learn from those conversations. So actually some offline stuff happening that's fulfilling for me, but I also feel like it's making a difference because I'm seeing people do really different, incredible things just that stands out to me.
Outside of education, Dr. Brad, what's another area of learning for you? What is it that ignites your passions outside of the school?
I just love competing. So sometimes too much, like getting too competitive and losing sight of the fun factor in games. But just with my kids, one of my kids recently got the game Crossfire. And just having a blast in those moments and trying to kind of, my love language is competing and playing games, or it's one of them. But meeting them where they're at too. But on this Crossfire thing, just a funny story, another indictment, a fathering, parenting indictment. But my son Finn recently beat me at Crossfire. Do you know the game where you shoot the little marbles back and forth on a plane? It's like a big playing field board. It is a kind of a board game, but it's an arena. So your marble is going at the little peg, and you're trying to score a goal. Your partner's shooting them back, not at you, but at the marble in the middle, and you're just trying to push this thing over the line. Anyway, he beat me at this game, and I'm telling you, I've been playing Crossfire since I was a kid. I have no excuse for losing, and he beat me. So after this is the competitive side of me. I'm like checking the table to see if it was level or if he had a advantage that the furniture was slightly tipped, and my wife is rolling her eyes. I play Risk too, the world domination game, and I played my daughter, we've been playing that since she was in kindergarten, and that was probably a little too early for her. But now we're playing. She's very good and strategic. So she and a friend were playing me, and here's another confession I haven't really uttered outside my home before, but I intentionally had to go after her because she was kind of the superior player. So I wasn't going after her friend because I needed to eliminate her because she was the threat.
Right.
And then I focused on her friend after my daughter was out. So that's, again, not my parenting, not the best moment, but it kind of speaks to the high level of gameplay that we have in our house. But aside from like competing, hanging out with my kids and staff at school, playing pickleball, we have a kind of a mini pickleball, I don't know if club is the right word. People get together. I'm also an avid reader. I just love doing that. I love talking about the books I'm reading and then trying to set kids up and teachers up for success so they feel comfortable talking about books too, maybe in addition to or supplanting things like reading logs that may or may not be working for kids or for teachers anymore. So that it all kind of goes together, the blend of the personal and the professional passions.
On Risk, quick tangent, do you start with Australia first or do you have another strategy?
Yeah, I always go for kind of what the game is showing me. So no, it's not.
Yeah.
I'll go for anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fun.
I love the question though. That was like your best question of the day. Anything about Risk is gold.
Oh, a guy I'm starting to notice who is really into the board games is Michael Matera. And follow him, and he is a board game expert. He I think he said on his podcast he played something like 200 over the Christmas break. So just unbelievable.
Nice. That's really cool. It would be fun to be a student in his class because you just know there's going to be gamification and lots of passion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Share about a personal habit or some kind of a productivity hack that contributes to your success. Is there something that you do on the daily or the weekly that really works for you?
My friend Jessica Cabeen wrote a book with some other friends called Balance Like a Pirate. And this concept of balance can be kind of fleeting, but here's the switch that I've made. I'll wake up. This is kind of a weird one, but I'll wake up and I'll make coffee and eat breakfast and stuff. But the mornings where I go to my cell phone first to quick check, it just is kind of like a rabbit hole that sucks you in. So the productivity hack I have is I purposefully, intentionally every day now, before looking at email and social media and other things, I'll start the coffee, but then I'll sit down and do like 10 minutes of devotion and just reading, connecting in my Bible and centering. And then I feel like I've put the main thing in life, and not coffee. That's probably like a little bit of a distractor, but taking that time to read and center as just almost an outward kind of in your face thing to the world. Like, world, I know what matters most, and everything else will follow that. So for me, I feel more centered and even good about myself by doing that.
Love that. I really love that a lot. Okay, we're moving into our quick picks. So I'm going to try to do less talking. That's hard for me to do, but I'm going to look to you for some of the voices and influences that are shaping your thinking and inspiring your practice today. So starting at Twitter, Brad, tell us about someone we should follow and share why they've been inspiring you lately.
Okay, Lindsay Stumpenhorst, educator, principal, super inspiring, good blend of family, funny stories, inspiring school stories. She's at Principal Boots on Twitter.
Okay, next. Now, you wrote about creating innovative schools for digital age students. So point us to an EdTech tool that you love using yourself, or one that you see being used really well in classrooms today.
Okay, I feel like a rebel doing this to you, and I apologize, but it goes with the theme.
Renegade,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
The tool, honestly, is pedagogy. When you know your approach and can articulate it, every single tool, you'll be able to decide if it will or will not fit that. So for my pedagogy is collaboration, student ownership, digital connectivity, experiential learning, all grounded in relationships. I could look at tools and choose or ignore based on their ability to do those things.
Recommend a book, one that you've been reading lately, or one of your all-time faves, and tell us why you recommend it.
Sure. I'll share one I read recently, Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, and the story behind reclaiming our calling. So I was working with my publisher, and he was pushing me to read Five Dysfunctions, and it's for anyone who hasn't read it. It starts out with a leadership fable, and as soon as I started reading, I'm like, that is why he wanted me to read it, because reclaiming our calling. I don't know if you've heard this, but it actually is a mashup of kind of a novel a novel and a PD book. It's just written different than most PD books I've ever read. So I was so impressed with George Couros and his advice to ground myself in really good writing that kind of did something similar to the approach I wanted to use.
As I mentioned earlier, thank you so much for supporting this podcast on Twitter and other platforms. Can you share with us about another one that you've been listening to, maybe on your commute or during your workouts lately?
Sure. I love the school leadership series by Danny Bauer. Long story short, he's just amplifying the voices of educators everywhere. So usually for 1 week it'll be one person, and it just kind of shifts off, and it's all leaders across the country who are podcasting for a week, and it's all under the umbrella of school leadership series. So definite, I would consider that must listening. Great variety and great takeaways, and it's only like 3 to 5 minutes per show.
Tell us about a YouTube channel that you enjoy. I've already mentioned yours. Is there another one that we should subscribe to that might be useful or just entertaining?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a dork, and I don't. In some ways, I never grew up, but I love Instagram, Lego Instagram channel, or YouTube channels on Legos. So sometimes my kids will walk in to I'll be watching TV, and it's a Lego show, or these awesome builds. So it's hard to explain, but just people creating these things that aren't real Lego sets. They're just huge castle scenes and epic battles or starships, et cetera, et cetera. So I love anything Lego on YouTube.
Awesome. And last one, just for fun, purely non-educational. What are you watching on Netflix right now? And I have to ask, are you watching Fargo? Because I know Fargo's not in Minnesota, but it's in the neighborhood. So what are you watching?
Hawaii Five-0. So the funny thing is, I've asked my wife, because we binge watch and we'll just watch tons of episodes rather quickly. But I'm like, can we save Hawaii Five-0 every year for the winter, because it is so cold here in Minnesota that it feels kind of like our mini vacation to Hawaii, and she's gracefully agreed. So we're currently doing Hawaii 5-0 again.
So smart, so strategic. I love that. So, Brad, what are the best ways for the listeners to follow you and get more of that great content?
Sure. I'd say active on Twitter at Gustafson Brad. And then my website is kind of a nice little hub to connect and talk and find other ways. So bradgustafson.com. And then the new book, Reclaiming Our Calling, is on Amazon.
Okay, simple enough. Brad, again, thank you so much for sharing your time with the podcast today. This was a conversation I've been looking forward to for some time. You are enjoyable to chat with, and man, you are challenging my practice as well. So thank you again for this. Take care, and let's talk again soon.
Hey, thanks so much, Tim.
Thanks so much for joining me here today on the Teachers on Fire podcast. For show notes and links from this episode, visit teachersonfire.net. You can also follow the show at Teachers on Fire on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Medium. And again, please do subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm your host, Tim Cavey, saying goodbye for now, and we'll catch you next time right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast.